Trust the original, huh? I guess I did again, even though I said I wouldn't. So this was a total random buy, and I took some screenshots when they had it. But because I'm nuts and a boot fanatic, occasionally even though I wasn't really interested in whites, at least I say that, I will check their website's clearance section. I think I used to get emails, but I think I unsubscribed. So I randomly would just check periodically to see if they have stuff in the clearance or if they're running sales, because I know they run sales a few times a year. I saw a photo of a boot, and again, I'll throw photos up from the listing. But I was like, wow, this is something that's really up my alley. I've never seen it before. And it was actually apparently a Hathorn model. They didn't say that on the site. If you look at the, again, I'll show the listing, it's just selling it as whites, but the Traveler model, I'll just get to that point right now. This is not a vintage, but an older model. This box you could tell is old. I had another pair of whites that had the old white box and this type of sticker, and you could see how it's been UV sun bleached, but it's kind of the same deal here. Distressed brown is the leather color. We'll get to that, but it's a Traveler 5-inch distressed 505 HC if you keep up with the random whites model numbers, and it's 11EE. And I thought, hey, that could actually work for me because my boot buddy Chris over at CSAW Boots, if you watch his channel, he has a similar foot to mine, but I think he's a slightly larger instep or volume foot, but then his big toes don't splay as much as mine. So we have similar sizing, but I kind of sometimes go a little bit longer than him, but then he'll maybe need to go wider or thereabouts. But I generally have found he can fit into slightly smaller boots comfortably than myself when we buy a similar pair. And he felt 11D was just too tight in this Last, which I'll get to in a second, and he felt 11E would have been the sweet spot for him. So I thought, well, 11EE would probably be the sweeter spot for me with my toe issue, and worst case I wear a thicker sock. So without further ado, let's just open this guy up here. I do kind of like these older boxes. They're kind of neat. I don't know if anyone can answer this, but I think they're pre-ABC Mart buying them, but I don't know if that's true. This is interesting. I've never seen this before. It looks like, and you could tell this box, I feel like this is just something they found in the back of the shop or whatever at White's, but that's like a spacer basically, so the boots don't bang around like nuts. So this is the pair, and typical Whites, as I'm just going to give them crap because I always do, they always arrive with dings and marks all over them. But in this case, it was a clearance boot, clearly something they haven't made in a while, so they found it at the back of the shop, or I don't know if it was a customer return from the past they forgot about, but it's sort of a discontinued old model. I'll give them a pass. And they call this distressed leather, so these kind of, none of it's like super deep. That one, that's going to require some brushing right there, but it's not like a gouge. It's just kind of a deep scuff, but most of these are kind of superficial. I would say I'd be more upset when I waited 9 months for those Nicks built rights in Predator Orange and paid, full price for them, and they arrived with kind of some deep scratches and nicks that you can't really polish out or brush out, I should say. This was a clearance boot, which I'll mention the price. These were, and again, I think I threw the screenshot up already, but these were $450 on the clearance closeout, I think is what White's calls that section. Pretty interesting build, to be honest. I obviously you guys know me and my sprung toe. This C461 Last has always appealed to me because of that spring. It doesn't have so much of the really super tall toe of, say, an 11067, but it's at least as tall as a 55. But with the spring, kind of has that vibe. And then lower heel, you guys know I've kind of lamented about my dislike of the classic Nix heel, and I've always thought White's does a better heel height. You know, their typical boot, you know, their tall boot is in a sense a 4-layer stack, whereas Nix was always a 5 or 6. And the only really tall boots White's makes are the Packer, but it's kind of intentional. Their normal boot is a little bit lower, and then this seems to be even lower than some. This looks like it's only two thick layers, if you look closely, of heel stack. So this is almost a lower heel. Maybe this is like when you do a baker's order and do a custom White's build and do a 1/4 inch lower. Maybe that's what this heel is comparable to. But you know, you can see it kind of accentuates the toe spring, and I think it looks pretty dope. A couple other things I'd never seen before. This stitch pattern I've never seen on any Whites or anything. This is, I don't know if that's a Hathorn thing, or if I'm Billy's Boots. Hawthorne, I think is what he calls it in his video, even though it's Hathorn, there's no W. Giving you grief there, Billy. This stitch pattern is interesting. I've just never seen that before. That, like, you see that? I almost thought it was a mistake, and then I looked at the pictures. What's cool at the closeout is you get to see multiple photos of both boots, and they have it on both sides on both boots. So clearly that's an intentional, you know, thing right there. Sorry, the lighting. Trying something different, the lights maybe not great. And then this is kind of cool. This is an internal heel counter with the single piece backstay, similar to a semi-dress Whites, which I like, but this, instead of having that straight line, they do kind of a heel outline. It's different, it's interesting. Definitely like a less worky boot, more, you know, they call it a Traveler. This was the Hathorn Traveler, so maybe, you know, it's supposed to be, I guess what it makes me think of, honestly, and maybe that was what their idea was, is it reminds me of the Beckman from Red Wing. You know, it's supposed to be like the gentleman's boot, but it's still tough. And I would say that because of the single piece backstay, internal heel counter, and the rolled top, lower height. The tongue isn't gusseted that tall. The gusset only goes up to the, well, I wouldn't say it's a low gusset either, but the gusset stops right here, right about the, what is that, the 5th eyelet. So I guess it's still a gusseted tongue, just not a high gusseted tongue. Also means no kilting needed. And then this is the very interesting thing to me is, so this is a stitch down, not like a hand sewn, but it's a single row. So I'm trying to get that close to the camera here. Let me make sure it's focused in the right place. But that is really tight. I mean, from the top, you almost can't see it. That's like, I would honestly say this is a smaller lip than even a lot of Goodyear welted boots. Super clean, super cool, super dope. I assume resoling this will be very problematic. So there's nothing left there to sand, and maybe that's actually why they were on the closeout. I personally am not worried about it. I've only resold a couple of my boots in my whole life because I end up just selling them before they get worn out. I think at least two pairs, but you know, considering the amount of boots I've owned, the majority of them end up being sold on or just keep wearing them. I'm not concerned about that, but I could see somebody who maybe meant to put a ton of miles on these, that could be a concern. But my hope or guess would be if I keep these long term and actually got to the point where this half sole was wearing out, I feel like if I go to someone like Unsung who offers the hand whatever, where they don't use a machine to resew it, they use an awl and do it by hand, you could at least get one out of these, and then they might have to just be very careful refinishing the side, because they obviously have to sand it when they put a new outsole on it. You know, they could leave the midsole and everything. Probably could do at least one, but you know, everyone makes such a stink about that, and I know the guys who buy the hardcore. This is not a hardcore work boot by Whites by any means, but you know, the smoke jumper type buyers and the, you know, who actually use it for that, or you know, Builder Pros with nicks, I could see that being a problem for them. Like, well, I can't really get the full value out of it, but the fact that that's not what this boot is, and that's not me, to me it was worth. And you know, it was $450, it was, you know, discounted. And they're similar, so, you know, obviously hand done stuff, so they're not identical, but they're both very, you know, this one at the toe tip maybe has a little bit more, but the size is just as tight. You know, look at that. I mean, there's nothing left. That's, you know what this makes me think of is Alden. Alden sands right up to the stitch on their welted boots sometimes, which basically means you need a new welt. With a Stitchdown, there is no ability to do a new welt. And paying someone like Steve over at Beato's, who he will do a conversion from a Stitchdown type, I think he can do a Stitchdown to Goodyear welt. He seems to be able to do anything. I know he switched 360s to 270. I assume you could pull this under and turn it into a welted boot, but you know, you're paying more than the boot's worth. So that's not something in my plans. It's basically, I know I either won't wear them out or I'll end up selling them, so I don't even care. It's wild that that is a double E. And it's exaggerated by, I think, how close they've sanded the sides, but like, I was like, there's a slight little bit of concern when I bought these that these might be too wide. Not even close. Like, this C461 definitely runs narrow. Now, you know, this, I saw Division Road, like all the whites they sell are always D width, except for the C461 Last. They had a couple builds, I think, or did. Maybe they've sold them all. And both of them were an E. And I'm like, I bet you they did an E on the C461 because it runs narrow. And I've surely read many forums talking about it being narrow. It's definitely a narrow Last. It's interesting too because even in the heel, you know, sometimes you've heard me on my videos talk about, you know, the toe won't be big enough, but the heels are too big. This in general feels like a D width boot. And it's a double E, and that's kind of crazy. The heel doesn't feel sloppy. I will put them on with it when I got them today, with a boot sock, or sorry, without a boot sock, with a thin sock. I'm wearing these Wolverine 1000 miles I've had forever, and I just tried them on just to see, wondering, you know, will they be too loose? And I think I'll wear them with a thin sock because this is a narrow Last. So, yeah, I can't even imagine how narrow this must feel in a D. It must be crazy narrow. Anything else I should call out, I guess? You know, I guess if I'm going to be critical of whites, which I always am, I mean, come on, guys. I'll make another quote to Billy. He talked about how, you know, in the ledge here, like a mouse could live in there with whites. Like, what the hell is this? Look at that. I guess a mouse could live over here. It's like an apartment complex. One mouse will live here, and then the other mouse will live over here. That's way, like they should have sanded off a lot more on that side, and then this boot is pretty much, you know, symmetrical. Not too worried about it. They were clearance. Yeah, it's almost like they didn't center. Yeah, I think that's what happened. They didn't, when they built this boot, they didn't center it on the midsole. It's like they glued it down offset to the outside, and then they didn't want to sand, I guess, a ton off, because then the whole heel would be narrow. Let's see if I'm right. Yeah. So, typical whites, you know, poor quality control. But in this case, I don't care because it's a weird makeup, and it was discounted. Check this out too. These are like super, I don't know if you call it oxidized or blooming or something, but you could tell this is an old pair. I mean, they don't even make this Quabog anymore. This is the old one that has the washers, but it's all kind of fogged up, I'll say, both of them. More proof. You know, this is an old discontinued model. Don't exactly know why they had it, but maybe they just clear. I've heard, I mean, you hear these stories with whites where they have all sorts of boots in the shop. So if you go to Spokane and like just go into the store. They'll have like a bunch of racks. I think I've seen pictures of it on like Reddit or something in the past. And they'll have a bunch of random boots and random sizes. Some of them I think are slightly worn or whatever. You know, customers didn't pick up their boots. They did a rebuild, whatever it is, and like they sell them cheap. You don't normally see those online. I don't think they've ever done that. Maybe that's what this sort of was, where they decided to grab one of those and actually throw it online. It's kind of weird. I mean, God, look at this. What the hell are they doing? Whoever was sanding this tore the shit out of the bottom of the sole there. This one's similarly bad. It's just hilarious, you know. Again, I don't really care because of what this was, but it's like if some dude had paid full price for these, and I did find some random site, Garmentory or something, I forgot the name, who had these listed, you know, none of them in stock. If I had paid $600 for these and they came this effed up, I would have returned them. So maybe that's it, you know. Their legendary poor quality control is why these were on the clearance. But yeah, interesting, very interesting build, different than usual. I wouldn't say the 461 is an amazing feel. It's interesting. I need to wear them, you know, more than 2 seconds. You know, I literally just put them on, put weight on my foot, stood up, and I was like, okay, it's not a disaster. But I need to lace them up and, you know, dial it in with maybe try it with a slightly thicker sock, or those like boot socks I have, or see how it goes with a thin sock. But it's definitely interesting, very unique, and I guess it's because it's a Hathorn boot, which I think Hathorn is dead, and I guess that makes sense because it's probably confusing for buyers when you have like multiple brands under the different names. But like it even says 1896. I think that's what White's says on theirs. Hand forged quality. Okay. The logo is interesting. I think the White's logo looks cooler, but definitely kind of an oddity. I do like this old handcrafted in the USA sticker. That's pretty different and interesting. And yeah, that's about it. I guess I'll say if I keep them, there'll definitely be another video talking about the fit and what I think of them. Probably be another video anyway, because if I end up selling them, I'll have to do a video on why they were kind of a bust. But anyway, cheers.